This presentation is brought to you by the Zach Ross Foundation, a global philanthropic organization with a focus on poverty, education, and mental health.
How was everyone's weekend? Yeah. Everybody got it down? Anybody do anything particularly special or everybody stayed home? Did you guys kind of read chapter 1? Who, does everybody have to look at this point? Who is here struggling to get the book? Okay. Who here has went over chapter 1 just a little bit? I want to make sure you guys are keeping up with things. We're going to get into chapter 2 for the remainder of the week. And we're going to talk about the biology of behavior. We went over it a little bit last Friday. So the biology of behavior. I want to talk about the relationship between the body, the physiological body, human body, and the mind, the brain. And talk about those relationships, how they influence one another, how they impact one another, how signals and transmissions and communications throughout the human bodies are created. Look at like synapses and neuroplasticity and things of that nature. So far, does anyone have any questions about anything so far? Okay. So human beings are a biopsychosocial systems. Does anyone know what biopsychosocial would mean? Can anybody make common sense out of that? All right, basically we're using our mind and our body to communicate with one another, right? We're using our physical body, our mental capacities to communicate with others. We want to understand behaviors and interactions between these systems, between the physiological system and the brain, how it functions, which translates to our mind, and how we think, behave, feel, etc. Neuroplasticity makes the human brain unique. I think we briefly talked last week sometime about neuroplasticity. Anyone want to reiterate what neuroplasticity is? This term that we hear from time to time? All right, so neuroplasticity deals with how our brain adapts and create new pathways based off our environment, based off certain actions, based off of trauma, based off our behaviors, and things of that nature. Children particularly have more neuroplasticity than adults because children have to constantly take in so much new information in order to change, in order to adapt, in order to learn new things. But as adults, we have neuroplasticity as well. Meaning we could pick up and learn something new if we really wanted to, or if we are forced to. So if you pick up a new job, you have to learn new trades, you have to learn new ways of doing things, you have to be trained properly to learn how to work within an organization. Say here at school, you have to learn how to time management, how to manage your time well to get everything done. So So neuroplasticity is important. Animals have neuroplasticity as well. So we're not unique in that space, neuroplasticity. Other animals, we are an animal as well too. We're a human animal, but other animals have neuroplasticity as well. And you take mice, for example. And so if someone ever had mice in their house, the apartment, the condo, whatever, and you would try to prevent mice from coming in, to try to eliminate mice, you will see that the mice will start to get smarter and figure out new ways, or even the mice will start to change their behavior. They'll adapt to what you do. They'll go around things. You may put food on the trash and they won't eat the food. Whether they can smell your scent or not, regardless. They'll find new ways to get in, move around. Because they're creating new pathways in their brain to change their behavior for survival. And we want to go back to nature. Right? We're all the same, pretty much. Right? Except for subjective matters. What it is we do, how much money we want to make, maybe certain health issues and things like that, but we are all pretty much the same. Neurocommunication. Some of the terms we're going to learn here are neuron. We're going to get into a bit of biological medical profession here. Neuron, cell body, dendrite, axon, the myelin sheath, glial cells or glia, and action potential. Typically what this all covers is how your brain receives information, right? And how your body also receives information to do. How your muscles move, how to respond to certain temperatures, certain stimuli, things that are automatic, why your heart rate increases, why you blink your eyes naturally without thinking about it. What are some automatic functions we could think of that we do automatically without thinking? Yes, sir? Breathing. Okay. Breathing, right? You're not controlling your breathing. You're not thinking about breathing. Right? What's that?
I said no now.
Now you are, right? So say most of the time we're not unless we're actively possibly doing something that's very strenuous or just having a discussion about it, right? You're not consciously aware of breathing. You're not consciously aware of that you're blinking constantly. But let's take this information here and make it relative to just say other parts of the day of things you do. Right? Let's say some of us have a propensity to be more disciplined than others. Some of us have more potential to be excited than others. And we talked about some people being more emotional than others last week as well too. Some people could be more stoic, right? Some people may have attention deficit. They can only pay attention to something for so long, then they have to go to something else, right? And others may not. Others may be like, yeah, I could sit in this chair for 10 hours if I needed to. Others are like, hey man, I'm shifting a lot. I'm trying to think about the things, trying to get some things done right now. I'm thinking about all these different factors. So here's your neuron, right? Your neuron is composed of a cell body, right? And that's the cell's life support system. And the axon is basically kind of this highway, this channel here. passes messages away from the cell body to other neurons, muscles, or glands. So think of your axon kind of like a highway where the messages are being sent. And these are biochemical signals. Right? Your body produces chemicals. Your body produces electricity, right? So you may produce electrochemicals. And these are sent through your body for the functions that happen, right? For your movement. How does your brain know for me to move my arm right now? This way. Our brain is telling my arm to do that. These things are quite instantaneous, meaning the speed of these actions are quick, right? And these dendrites kind of are these branches that go off the neuron, and they receive messages from other cells. So basically, they're kind of the receptors to receive messages from other cells. So the neural impulse or action potential is the electrical signal, right? Basically, your body's going to create an electrical jolt. This jolt is going to push this information through. It's going to give it a force. Give it a force to push it through, down the axon, to the neuron, and then out. And you can just think of the myelin sheath as just the covering of the axon to protect that. Right? It's a very important nerve system to protect. So this is important of understanding how messages are sent to your brain to process information, receive information, get information, how you convey thoughts. Right? It all happens here in the neuron. So back to that neuron impulse, that force, that action potential, right? So it fires changes down the axon when stimulated. So you receive a stimulus and then you receive a force that fires down the axon. So electricity is generated from chemical events. And we say that your body is a bioelectrical is made of those substances, right? It's made up of chemicals, and it's made up of other things, but it's made up of electricity as well too. Right? Your heart is generation of chemical electrical function. So electricity is generated from chemical events. Ions, which are electrically charged atoms, are exchanged. We'll take a further look at this on this next slide. All right. So without getting too kind of complicated here with the action potential, we're looking at stimulation from neurons that cause this brief exchange in electrical charge. Right? And these are caused from positive sodium ions and positive potassium ions, as well as negative ions as well too. Those opposing mechanisms create forces that does that pushing down the axis. As the action potential moves speedily down the axon, sodium potassium pumps in the cell membrane. It restores the first section of the axon. So basically, what you just need to know is that these forces of sodium and potassium pushes this impulse down the axon to create this charge. How does neurotransmitters influence motions and emotions? So things like acetylcholine plays a role in learning and memory, the messenger between motor neurons and skeletal muscles. Endorphins, are we familiar with endorphins at all? Dopamine, endorphins, these sort of chemicals. So they're naturally occurring opiates produced in the brain. So they give stimulus within the brain. Right? So you get a sort of injection of the stimulus, which could create excitement, which can create euphoria. All of these different emotions. Drugs and other chemicals alter neurotransmission. So as psychiatrists, they prescribe drugs that can help with depression, and they prescribe drugs that can sort of help and manage with schizophrenia, and other things. But those ultimately alter transmission within the neural system. And agonist molecules increase neurotransmitter action, and antagonist molecules decrease. So they're opposite of one another in how they function with the transmission of neurons. So back to how neurons communicate. Are we familiar with synapses at all? We've heard the term synapse. Did anyone give just an assessment what they think it is?
It's like the patterns.
Yeah, essentially it's part of the axon terminal. Right here we can see that. Right? Synapses are towards the end. Between the synapses are actually a gap. And so there's sort of this gap between the synapses. And so what happens here in the synaptic gap is when the action potential reaches its end terminal, it stimulates the release of a neurotransmitter molecule. And these molecules cross over that gap to go over to the other synapse. Right? So these spaces. And then you have these receptor sites receiving the neuron. And then you have your neurotransmitters too. So this allows electrically charged atoms to enter the receiving neuron and excite or inhibit a new action. So these processes are constantly happening, right? We think of our body almost like a computer. You know, these bits of information have to constantly be processed over and over and over again for new things to happen. So the human body is an amazing thing. You know, there's many things we don't understand about it, but we can understand the biological, physiological side of these things. So if you have a brain, and someone described it as your mind, what does they mean by that? What exactly is your mind? Right? We know you got a brain. That's a physical substance, right? It's something we can look at and analyze. What do we mean by mind? Yes?
Your intelligence or your thoughts?
But potentially, right? That could be part of your mind, right? Your intelligence, your thought, right? Would we say that that's maybe like an objective point of view, subjective? I mean, is our mind just an abstract thing? And it's not a real thing to compare. It's almost, in essence, you're saying like a soul, right? We don't fully understand what a mind is. We do understand what brain and behavior and all these different things are, right? But that's where those are philosophical debates and our biological and physical debates. Those are just kind of philosophical, ideological perspectives. And I believe Hippocrates, Aristotle, who I'm a big fan of, he thought that the mind lies in the heart, that the heart is sort of the main organ where things are processed emotionally, where thoughts are processed. Hippocrates, I believe, came and argued that it was more in the brain, right? And now we kind of live by that. The mind is located primarily in the brain, but there's a balance between the two things, right? You've been heartbroken, you've been excited, you've been depressed. These things do affect your heart, right? So we say there's just a relationship, but primarily things on the brain. The processing center is in the brain. So you can kind of think of your brain as a CPU, right? Now back to our nervous systems, right? Nervous system is all through our body, all the way from our brain down to our toes, all right? Our arms and our fingers. So we have this nervous system all through our body. And what is its purpose? Its purpose is to send signal, to transmit data, to transmit communications of various things, right? To move your fingers, to know something is hot or cold, to do certain functions. So that nervous system, once we said, was electrochemical, right? Again, we got electricity and we have chemicals inside that communicate this network. And it consists of all nerve cells of peripheral and central nervous system. This communication network takes information from the world and the body's tissues and is used to make decisions. It sends back information and orders to the body's tissues. So it's a back and forth. It's a highway system. We got our motor output, which controls our skeletal systems. Our sensory output, which controls sensations from various stimuli. We have a parasympathetic system that calms us, or the calming system. And we have a sympathetic, which is used for arousal. To get excited, to get aroused, versus the other one is to relax, to calm yourself. To create this balance, this harmony within our bodies. Talk a little bit about autonomic systems, which controls the self-regulated action of internal organs, breathing, heartbeat, etc. The essential part is in the brain and in the spinal cord. That's where all things come back up and down, and go to your brain and make decisions based off certain things. So can we explain the difference between different neuron types? Sensory neurons, motor neurons, interneurons. We don't have to talk about interneurons because we're going to cover it. But sensory versus motor. What are the differences? Right, motor deals with movement, right? How we move our body.
Sensory is like touch.
Yeah, right. Sensitive is more feel. I feel that this is hot. I feel that this is cold. Right? But even beyond that, right, we have our eyes, which is probably the most prolific part of taking in information. Right? So we see the world through them and different things, and those have responses. Right? Based off other countries' wow, that's really beautiful. That inspires me. I feel something happening, you know? Do we feel that we're more visual than anything else? What's more important? Hearing, see, tasting, touch? You say see?
Hearing.
You say hearing. Tell me why. So you think hearing is extremely more powerful to say kind of than the others?
Yeah.
That's why music, we say making music has such an influence on us. And you said, sing, right? Why do you say so?
I just think there's some things that, when it comes to looking, it's pretty, when it comes to looking at things, you see things different.
So it just processes in your brain differently than, say, hearing. Can people see music? Or can we hear sort of visual representation? Can we hear a picture?
Yeah.
You can? Explain.
So I can't hear a picture, like, say you listen to a song, or you can play it on there, like how you think it would go. Say like, for example, like a music video, like how you think music video would go. Like, lyrics to the song, like how the lyrics in the picture for you.
Yeah, absolutely, right? You can close your eyes and just listen to music, and you'll get visual representations of things in your mind. And it'll paint its own picture, multiple pictures. Okay, did you say you could see music?
But like, you can see like a pattern when music is being made. Like a real artist, you can see like what to do when it comes to how to make a song better.
So you could visualize patterns in music, which is interesting. Anybody else want to add? What's more important? Right? Feeling, seeing, hearing, tasting. What's most important to you? So if someone's like, hey, you know what? Food is more important. So actually tasting, to me, right, being great, right? Or seeing something very beautiful, an object. Or hearing music. Or touching something, soft. So back to our nervous systems. We have these peripheral nervous system, and it controls sensory and motor neurons that connect to the rest of the body. Somatic systems enable voluntary skeletal muscle control. Right? And autonomic, we talked about that. Those are automated. Let's talk about sympathetic arousal, parasympathetic is calm. Right? So here we have our brain, we have our spinal cord, goes from top to bottom. Right? This area right here is used for pupil dilation, arousing. So you ever see someone maybe on cocaine or some very powerful drug, right? Let's say the police stops them. Police pull out a flashlight. Police looking in their face. What's the police looking for? What about their people? Their dialogue, right? Very wise. The whole is very large. People are extremely large. Like you could Google a picture of like someone on cocaine and look at their pupil versus normal. You're like, wow. Right? What happens there is letting in a lot of more information. Right? You can think of people like mushrooms, acid, things like that. They're taking in so much information that it distorts their perceived reality. So they might see this whole room just turn upside down or something, you know? And look at you, it would just expand out or something crazy like that. All right, we got here is where your heartbeat will accelerate. There's an inducement. We got stomach functions right here, and this digestion, and it moves down here. These are different processes of neurons, how it's telling the body to communicate something is happening. It causes changes. So here is going back to more calming, right? It's more of that parasympathetic calming function. To slow your heartbeat down, like to tell yourself to relax. Take it easy, relax. Now here is where it allows blood flow to sex organs. Okay, so we see a lot of sexual arousal stimulus happening in this area. Those signals down there. Once again, we're very similar to most animals, right? We may perceive that humans, we are quite impactful to the planet more so than any other animal, but other animals are very similar. How these processes happen. So the brain neural networks and neurons work group clusters. Talk about spinal cord, two-way system of ascending and descending neural fibers. We've got reflexes, which are automatic, right? Pathways of pain, and our reflexes to it. Something's hot, and pull away automatically. You're not just going to leave your hand there on the hot stove. We have receptors all over our body. So here's talking about skin receptors in our fingers. Sometimes go to the doctor and they hit your knee, they see if it jerks properly, right? To make sure that your nervous system is properly working correctly. So you get an automatic knee jerk. So endocrine system. Just, basic things to learn. Hormones, adrenal glands, epinephrine, norepinephrine, pituitary glands. And our hypothalamus here in our brain, located near the center of the spinal cord, east of the brain, controls pituitary gland, which is normally related to growth. Right? So, for example, if you see very tall basketball players or people over 7 feet or more, their pituitary gland might be quite enlarged. Enlarged pituitary gland. So they may be 6 feet by the age of 12 or something like that. So it secretes different hormones, some of which affect other glands. Your thyroid gland affects your metabolism. Your adrenal glands, here below your chest, they trigger fight or flight response, right? So they deal with sort of fear. Are you going to stay? Are you going to go? How quick is that reaction? Pancreas used for regulation of sugar in the blood. Ovaries secrete female sex hormones, and then testes secretes male sex hormones. And so once you go through puberty, there's a lot of change happening in your body at this point, particularly when it comes to sex hormones. So you'll feel a lot different, right? And there may be more arousal than you were before. The body you'll develop acne. Right? These different chemicals are processing, which may irritate the skin, things of that nature. So it's a constant evolution. The feedback system reviews the connection between the nervous and the endocrine. So your brain goes to the pituitary, goes to other gland, creates hormone, and your body and brain works together. Any questions so far? So the point of this is just to have a basic understanding of what's happening physically within your body, so that later on we will talk more about the mind and our mental process and our behavior and things that make us particularly unique to us will make more sense. Right? And this is a constant evolution. We're constantly learning based off these things of how biochemical process affects human behavior. What makes someone commit murder instantaneously or not instantaneously? what makes someone depressed because of certain triggers. And what makes us substance abusers based on certain factors. Let's go through that. So there's tools for discovery, having our head examined, right? Different type of measurements within the brain, right? We have EEGs, PETs, MRIs, fMRIs. Most commonly I'll say it's like EEGs and MRIs. New activities happening within the brain, neuromarketing, neurolaw, neuropolitics, neurotheology, neurohype not, which is kind of funny there. Some current research on all of this is Europe's Human Brain Project, Cycling Code Human Connectome Project. And basically seeing how the outside world affects your brain, how it physically affects your brain. How does the evolving politics in America affect your brain? And how does the evolving situation of COVID is going to impact your brain, which will inevitably impact your behavior? How does belief impact your brain? How does non-belief impact your brain? Are there differences in the brain function between people who have no belief, right, who are atheists, versus people who have some sort of belief system? Because you say if that's part of your everyday living, ultimately it should be some change in the function, what's going on inside. And those things can pass on and pass on. We talked a little bit about genetics last week, right? Passing on these critical information. Right? Someone have more propensity to be substance abuser because parent or grandparent was. There's research to show hypersexual activity because of parents and grandparents, right? Or just your early stage environment. I would say particularly your early stage environment, right? Which is around 0 to 6. So that probably the most important time in life is the parts you probably vaguely remember, And kind of like, hey, why am I the way that I am? Like, where did all this come from? Why do I like the things I like? Why do I act the way that I act? What makes me? Most important part of that was your early stage development. Yes?
Are there consequences for like psychologists that misdiagnose like patients?
Well, psychiatrists yeah, of course. I mean, for any practice, there's liability, right? If you practice any sort of medicine, surgeries, internal medicine, right? Just prescribing people medications, doing blood work. You have a misdiagnosis. So there's liability. That's why, as a medical professional, you're going to biology, or you're in biology, right, sir? You're in biology, are you a biology major?
Exercise science.
What's that? Exercise science. Someone else was in biology, which I thought they were trying to do like a medical doctor. As a medical doctor, you would have some sort of liability insurance, right? For those cases. I mean, what doctor gets it right every time? Nobody. Nobody's perfect. You have to think too with COVID, right? This is going to make it really interesting. People who are having a lot of issues after taking the vaccine, after taking a booster, but then trying to relate, hey, is that really due to the vaccine? Are you sure? Or is that just another side effect, something happening to you naturally, right? But also, getting the virus itself. Like, hey, there's side effects, there's really bad side effects to getting the virus, you know? How do you win? You can't. It's a catch-22, you know? Catch the virus, you may have a lot of problems. Take the vaccine, there's some small data that show it may cause some issues. You know, or boosters or continuous boosters, on and on within the future. But that's what everything, you know, that's the kind of within the vaccination, anything foreign coming into your body. But as a psychologist, remember we said there's different types of psychologists, right? So we said, I think kind of what you're referring to is clinical psychologist, which is like gift therapy. Hey, come sit and talk. Talk to me about when you were a kid. You know, how was mom and dad? Was there a mom and dad? All right, you know?
It's because like, okay, so in sociology, they were talking to us about an experiment, the Rosenham experiment. I don't know if you heard about that, but it's where like a group of people acted like they had like, you know, they went to like, where psychiatrics like basically like diagnosed them, but like they were actually normal. They were just trying to see, like, you know, I don't know how to explain
No,
it.
I get what you're saying. They were trying to see how actively people misdiagnose, right? They had
Yeah.
absolutely nothing wrong with them, but they wanted to come to somebody so they could go, yeah, guess what? You have this. You have a disorder. And yes, we see that actively a lot with ADD, ADHD, which is kind of the catch-all now, right? Kids who don't pay attention in class, right? Kids who fidget a lot. We would, you know, and a lot of people start to run with that and just describe kids as, oh, your son or your daughter is ADD, ADHD, and blah, blah, blah. Not necessarily the case always, you know? We could say some people may have a unique personality and different stimulus to certain things, you know? Some things are boring to you. It may not be boring to others, right? Some things are super exciting. It may not be exciting to someone else. These are the processes that make you you. You can't be the same as everyone else, right? But then we start to generalize because here we have a community. We have a community of students, you know, which means there's something happening here. We're trying to learn, engage, and get something out of the class, and maybe learn from others, and maybe get over things, right? Get over the fear of not knowing, or introvertedness, right? I don't want to talk too much. That may sound stupid if I ask, but there's nothing stupid in the world. Everything's about inquisition. It's about, you know, curious, right? Like, hey, how does it work? But if we don't properly ask the questions, that can carry on throughout life. And think about that, they can have extremely negative consequences on life. I'm afraid to ask. Why? You gotta figure that out. Afraid to ask may slow progress where you're trying to be. Man, how come I can't get to where I'm trying to get? Because you don't ask enough questions. You know? I think this is all what makes us us. And the thing is, we in psychology, remember we said not being biased is not showing shame to people. Hey, I'm a drug addict. Okay. First part is that you recognize it. That's extremely good. Other people just deny. I don't have a problem. I'll be fine. Yeah, right. You know? So this is where we're trying to get to as the class goes, like understanding self. If you understand self, you can typically understand others, you can understand organizations, you can understand government, you can understand all types of things, you know? And if you can understand how things work and behave, I'm telling you, this information transfers to everything. You guys haven't studied economics. What's economics? Yes, human behavior within the market. How come the Bitcoin, how come Bitcoin went up so much? Really? Well, why? How did it get popular versus other things? There's a billion other things.
It's like a hive mind. A lot of people populate. And so a lot of people need to stay on them.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenon. Right, man, this unique thing happened. What happened? This one particular thing. It's worth like $50,000, $60,000. A coin. Why? Because of human behavior. Okay? Look at the stock market. You're like, oh man, how does this Tesla, go up to this number? I don't know. How did it get there? Because enough people said, hey, I want to buy some more stock. Right? I think this is valuable. Keyword is think. Right? And things happen. So if you've able to see the world like that, it changes the game. It actually made me a very savvy investor early on. Psychology probably made me savvy with the business, right? Able to understand cultures, understand the differences in people, accept people for who they are, not based on my biases and my BS, right? You are who you are based on your background, your culture, your language. That's life, right? But we have these biases that we can't move past because we're not able to see the world in these ways, right? We're constantly pigeonholed. I'm right, I'm this, I'm better, these people are better than this, these are like, when you see it this way, then you say, oh, life is a blank canvas, right? This is human behavior taking place. Right? How's the next guy gonna win the presidency? Same way the Tesla stock went up. The phenomenon is going to happen. A lot of people are going to believe it. Right? Bitcoin. It's the same process is happening. Marketing certain products, how certain things catch on versus how other things don't. So psychology has a perspective, and the perspective is really kind of standing outside of your body and observing yourself. And you observe yourself, you observe the world. Because we're all the same. We're pretty much all the same, based on just unique characteristics, things we do. So you can pretty much guess it. We have to eat, all of us. We have to all go to the restroom. That's not going to ever change. So with with just the basic knowledge of saying, like, hey, I understand that's a human being, you can make a lot of sense out of stuff within the mind. I'm not going to drag on with this, but I'll just finish with this. Some of the older brain structures, they function without any conscious effort. They're sort of automated too, right? You have certain thoughts that happen just automatically. Brainstem is the oldest part of the central brain core, automatic survival function, crossover point. Fight or flight, automatic. Hey, there's a shooting just happened. I'm out the door. Why? Fight or flight. You can stay and try to observe, right? But these are automatic things. Just to keep in mind. Some things are automatic, other things are conscious. You think about. Hey, let me actually look to see which way they're going. Okay, they're going that way, I'm going this way, let me start. Okay, they're using that way. I'm going. Conscious versus automatic. All right, I'll see you guys.
This presentation was brought to you by the Zach Ross Foundation, a global philanthropic organization focusing on poverty, education, and mental health. We hope you've enjoyed.